A raging war in Ukraine has now evolved into a full-fledged economic battle with the European Union for Russia. Moscow has now further cut gas supplies to Europe as the state energy giant Gazprom turned off its taps for some companies in Denmark and Germany, citing payment failures for previously made gas deliveries. Russia's move comes after the European Union decided to place an embargo on most Russian oil imports as part of its financial sanctions against the Kremlin, aimed at curbing and condemning a raging war. The EU said that the ban would impact 75% of Russian oil imports, aimed to be raised to 90% by the year end. Gazprom has halted its supply to Gazterra, which buys and trades gas on behalf of the Dutch government. The firm is further looking to cut supplies to Danish energy firm Ørsted from today and to Shell Energy for its contract to supply gas to Germany, claiming that both these companies did not make payments in rubles for previous supplies, a condition that was imposed by Russian firms owing to increasing European sanctions and subsequent fall in the country's currency value.
It seems to be limited in its effects because it is not about large numbers of cubic meters, that is, large quantities of gas. But of course, we are going to look at this very carefully. We really do need to see exactly what the impact is, but it doesn't seem to be too bad at first sight.
While the Dutch claim to have found a different supply source for 2 billion cubic meters of gas, the Danish firm Ørsted said that the halted supplies will not have an immediate impact on the nation's supplies. Remember, Moscow has already halted the supplies of natural gas to Bulgaria, Poland and Finland, citing disagreement over payments in Russian rubles by the European nations, as the EU's energy commissioner had previously said that member states would have to reject Moscow's demands to make the bloc's sanctions effective. Europe gets about 40% of its natural gas from Russia, and despite the ban on Russian oil, the bloc so far stands divided on imposing sanctions on gas imports from Russia. In March, the EU committed to reducing gas imports from Russia by 2/3 within a year. However, it has been hard to get the agreement on an outright import ban, mainly because of the huge reliance on Russian gas. Germany, for example, relies on Russia for almost half of its gas supply. There's doubt over whether the EU nations will be able to find other gas supplies other than from Russia. Now, for more on this, we are now being joined by our correspondent, Rosie Burchard from Brussels. Rosie, thanks for joining us again. As we've been discussing, Russia has clearly retaliated. Moscow has now further cut gas supplies to Europe. How will this impact the European continent?
Well, we've heard so far from the companies that have been affected by this particular cut from Gazprom that they don't seem to be in a panic mode. So Danish buyer Ørsted said it's looking to the European market to replace those supplies, and Gazterra, which buys for the Dutch government, says it's already contracted elsewhere for the supplies that it was expecting to receive from Gazprom for the next few months. So no panic this morning. However, what this does show, Priyanka, is an escalation in this economic battle as we see the European Union and Russia trade sanctions and counter-sanctions. Let's go back to where this began. Russian energy giant Gazprom made a demand that gas contracts be paid in rubles. That was widely seen at the time as a bid to try and boost the ruble, the Russian currency, and to circumvent sanctions. Now, there was some disagreement among the EU member states and the European Commission of whether and how that would violate existing EU sanctions. There has now been some technical work done, and it seems that the solutions that has been found is to pay into a bank account in euros, which will then be transferred into rubles. But the firms that have been cut off so far seem to have not complied with that particular demand, and therefore Gazprom has cut them off. Now, you quite rightly pointed out, all of this comes just after EU leaders agreed on fresh sanctions against Moscow, which include a partial embargo on Russian oil. But as you also rightly pointed out, no agreement yet so far on whether or not there could ever be an embargo on Russian gas. That is something which is much more difficult for the bloc to replace and much more politically divisive and contentious.
Right, just to follow up to that, Rosie, is this ongoing tit-for-tat sanctions war, specifically over gas, going to wreak havoc for Europe at large, especially once winter sets in?
Well, once winter sets in, that's a big question. The summer months will buy European countries some time before the heating season begins in the autumn here in Europe. But so far, there has been no havoc wrought in so far as the countries which have been fully cut off, so that's Bulgaria, Poland and Finland, have been able to quite easily replace supplies via sharing mechanisms with the neighbouring countries, and Finland, which was fully cut off after it applied for membership of NATO, was able to also quite easily replace those Russian gas supplies simply because it was only ever a very small part of the nation's energy mix. However, Priyanka, if we were to see, for example, overnight all of Germany cut off from Russian gas supplies, the country simply would not be ready to be able to replace them straight away. You mentioned the European Union has a big goal overall to reduce reliance on Russian gas by 2/3 by the end of this year, but it's a target. It's not a legally binding embargo. And the European Commission, headquartered in the building behind me, is going out into the world to try and find replacement sources. They've been in talks with countries including Norway, Qatar, Algeria to try and replace those supplies which come from Russia and reduce that overall dependence. But it's no mean feat. It's something which cannot happen overnight, and particularly when it comes to sourcing different types of gas. So, for example, liquefied natural gas from the United States. That also involves radically changing the infrastructure which is here in Europe. That's why the EU is also trying to ramp up investment in renewables to try and replace overall the supplies which come from Russia and reduce that dependence as Russia's attacks on Ukraine continue.
Right, Rosie, thanks so much for joining us with all the latest inputs. Thanks for joining us on Wion. Wion World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.